Welcome, everyone. I'm Will Mitchell, Pomfret class of 1984 and the school's Director of Advancement. We'll get started in a minute with our spring conversation with Tim Richards. We'll just let more alumni show up first, but we'll get started soon.
Those of you who have Dan Fales as your name and your name is not Dan Fales, if you know how to change your name, feel free.
Easy to do. You can just click on those three little buttons at the top right of your screen and hit rename, and you will no longer be Dan Fales. Not that we don't like Dan.
So the group is growing and we'll get started in a few minutes, or a couple minutes, I should say.
Hey, Vassar, how you doing?
Andrew, I'm well.
Andrew's good. Good.
Good to see you.
Good. Nice seeing you too.
Hopefully, we'll see you back on campus next spring.
Well, we'll see, for sure.
Big reunion. We'll have 6 classes on campus, I think.
Seem to have several Dan Fales, according to me.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of people who are being identified as Dan Fales, the class of 1955, which is great. So I would, again, for those of you who have not renamed yourselves, I would encourage you to do so.
Will the real Dan Fales stand up?
Where's the button to rename?
So if you put your cursor in the top right of your little screen, of your corner, you'll see a blue square with 3 dots. If you click on that square, you should see a rename in the drop-down menu.
Okay,
Greg,
I don't have it, but
I
don't worry.
can tell that you're still Dan Fales.
That's a good one.
So I suspect, Tim, that you become sort of an expert like many of us at the Zooming technology, huh? Something you probably never thought about a couple of years ago.
Remarkably, I am not expert. I'm when I got my master's in French, you had a pronunciation test, and you could be proficiency, competence plus, and so I would give myself a competence plus in Zoom, but not proficiency. All right, how are our numbers, Will?
Yeah, so looks like we've got 37 now in. So what do you think? Should we get started and I can just say a couple things about how we'll handle the questions and then turn it over to you, Tim?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Well, again, I'm Will Mitchell, Pomfret class of 1984 and the school's Director of Advancement. Thanks for joining this spring conversation with Tim. Tim is going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, share some opening remarks, and then we'll turn it over to all of you for your questions and comments. I'll ask everyone to keep themselves on mute when we get to the Q&A, and we're going to use the chat feature for questions. So you can either put your name in the chat, and then I can call on people in turn to unmute themselves and then ask their question. Or I suppose if you prefer, you can write your question in the chat, and then I can make sure Tim sees it, or I read it to Tim in the order that it's received. So that's how we'll try to kind of manage this, but this is really just meant to be an informal conversation for alumni with Tim, and with Tim now serving in his 10th year as Pomfret's 12th head of school. I think no introduction needed, and so I turn it over to you, Tim.
All right, thank you, Will. It's great to have you all here. It's great to have Will here. It's nice to have, if you haven't had a chance to meet Will, our new Director of Advancement, taking over for Vassar, who served incredibly capably last year as an interim director. It's nice having an alum in the role, and I hope in time that you'll all get to meet him. I'm really appreciative of you all taking some time to join us for something of a Pomfret update tonight. This afternoon, and there are a couple of board members on this call, I sent a fairly comprehensive update, as I do about 6 times a year, 8 times a year. And I think it was about a 7-page single-space document. It outlined in great detail all aspects of life at Pomfret School today. And for me to go through that whole document, I think would take about 2 hours. Will's given me 10 minutes to get you all up to speed. So wish me luck. I'm going to hit on a couple of key points that I think are important, and then we can open up the floor to any questions that you may have. The big news for us is that after having a winter that we spent in distance learning mode, that we reopened school a couple of weeks ago, beginning on March 19th. And it is simply fantastic to be back in person. It has not been easy to be back in person. We've had already a handful of active cases on campus, students who have been diagnosed, other students who have been therefore quarantined as close contacts, and learning to deal with all the headaches that so many of our peer schools dealt with this fall and this winter hasn't been a ton of fun. But that's been a fairly small blemish on sort of a joyful return to campus. And I give as an anecdote, and I think for so many of you that the chapel is a sort of a central experience. And doing senior chapel talks through this medium, through Zoom, which is what we were doing in the winter. So even in the fall when we were in person, lost some of its real zip, I would say. And yesterday we were treated to our first series of chapel talks with seniors in the chapel with their classmates in the chapel. And while we had seniors in the fall deliver their talks from St. George, it was all live streamed. But yesterday we had about 90 seniors in the chapel and their advisors. And there were 4 remarkably great talks. One in particular, and I'll just share with you what it was. It was a senior named Sam Eglin, who's a 4-year senior. And many of you, I think, heard that we lost a senior to cancer this year. And this was Sam's best friend, a young man named Zach Stolarik. And Sam wrote a letter to him, and he delivered this letter as his senior chapel talk. And it was stunning and so deeply thoughtful. And it just would not have been the same had we not been in person. And those are the moments that sort of define the Pomfret experience for so many people. And they've been missing. And to have that sort of back in place felt really, really good. So the pandemic and COVID has, for Pomfret, as it has for so many of you, has certainly been time consuming, but it hasn't been all consuming. We haven't been standing still as the pandemic has sort of folded itself around us. And it has impacted so many things for us this year and occupied more of our headspace than we would have liked. But we were actively spending time looking to the future. And we were doing this before the pandemic started. And then actually the pandemic has provided us a new lens through which we are looking forward. We're in the process of a review of the school's mission statement, the school's strategic vision statement, and a strategic planning process. We, as you, I think, all have heard, we incorporated a new set of values, core institutional values last year, community growth and integrity, that are serving us really, really well. And we're really trying to develop more intentional alignment across all aspects of our program. So, we're looking at 3 strategic initiatives broadly, and this is way premature, but the first of those is access and inclusion. The second is alignment of our programs, and there'll be much more to unfold about that and unpack as we move forward. And then as I think all schools need to be doing now, sort of strategic focus on financial management for our future. So again, as I say, nothing radically different here. We don't think that we need to radically shift, but we do know, and I've been using Arundhati Roy's analysis of the pandemic being a portal between two times. And we're using this time to go to thoughtfully move from sort of pre-pandemic thinking about Pomfret and its future to post-pandemic Pomfret and its future, and really trying to take advantage of the opportunity that we've been given. We're thinking about strategic planning. We're thinking about campaign planning. We've been working extensively on a draft of a case statement for a planned campaign that'll be coming down the road at some point in time. The board and the senior administration, in time the faculty, and then beginning this week, connecting with groups of alums and parents to get their feedback and determine what really is resonating philanthropically with those groups will go a long way to shape the sort of the priorities that we're establishing for that campaign. Right now, again, just in broad strokes, the Monell Science Building is a conspicuous liability for us. And so we're thinking about ways that we can take care of that issue. Probably going to replace the whole building. We are focused on raising significant endowment dollars for financial aid to increase diversity within the student body. We are thinking about endowment growth for support of faculty and staff compensation and professional development and professional growth. And then, of course, the Pomfret Fund, which is a part of the campaign. And the Pomfret Fund helps us support these areas every year. And we are counting that as part of the campaign during this quiet phase of the campaign. We are moving forward with some capital projects even before the campaign gets underway. We have, on Friday, we'll sign the final documents, closing the deal on additional, adding some new debt to the school's records and refinancing all of our old debt. The net result is that we'll add about close to 10 million, just over $10 million of new debt. And we will decrease our annual payments, amortizing that debt over 30 years. With those funds, and we have to use the proceeds from this use the new debt issuance dollars in 3 years. We are going to do some things that are really more exciting than others. We're undertaking beginning this summer, a full interior renovation of Hart Auditorium so that we have a community gathering space where we can fit the entire student body and faculty in a seat. Renovations of the Jan rink are underway. The rink, all the mechanicals of the rink have sort of died. We were fortunate that we didn't have a hockey season this year because we have had very low confidence that we would have been able to sustain a sheet of ice. So the Jan rink will get both a cosmetic facelift and a whole new mechanical operation system. We are going to be building 3 new faculty, non-dorm faculty residences next to what is currently the girls' JV soccer field as you head down toward the facilities department. And we're going to put a new roof to the tune of about $1.3 million on the school building because the old roof, the slate roof, is coming apart. So those are exciting projects. All of them will be fully underway this summer. We've hired a new Dean of Enrollment Management. Unfortunately, Amy Graham is leaving us for the Stevenson School in California. She's going back to her California roots. We're excited for her, sad for us. We have hired Susan Mantilla-Goyen as our new Dean of Enrollment Management. And we are also bringing in a new Director of Admissions Operations a gentleman named Peter Anderson. And I think there'll be a tremendous 1-2 punch in our admission office. I hope to have news about the hiring of a new Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion tomorrow, or at least sometime this week. We're excited. We've engaged with a search firm looking at this process. We've been engaged with this search firm for much of the year, and I made an offer this weekend to a candidate we're very, very excited about. So stay tuned for that. Also on the DEI front, I'm looking forward to, in the next couple of months, receiving the report from the task force on DEI that I established last summer. That report will serve as the roadmap for me and for the new Dean of DEI and for everyone at the school as we look to improve the good work that we're doing around DEI. The Day of Giving, as alums and is coming up, and I hope that that's something that you'll want to participate in 2021. It's our biggest single day event of the year. It will happen on Tuesday, the 27th, so 3 weeks from today. Last year, we had over 1,300 alumni, parents, and friends make a gift on our 5th annual Day of Giving, and we're excited and hopeful that we'll see even greater numbers come together this year to support everything that we're doing, support the school's mission and its students and faculty. So I hope that you'll be willing to make some small contribution or large in whichever way you can, or to volunteer in some way to maybe reach out and see if you can get some of your friends to support us on that really important day. And then lastly, before we move into questions, because I know I'm already over my 10 minutes, we will have our virtual reunion this year from May 5th to May 8th. Sadly, we can't be in person yet. We do fully anticipate being in person a year from now. You'll be able to find more information if you go to our website. There will be lots of opportunities, I think, to do some fun things, to take a virtual campus tour, to attend some classes or mock classes here, both from students and faculty members, and then certainly attend the Alumni Association meeting and the annual awards ceremony that will happen even if we're not able to be raising glasses in the same room with one another. So that is a super quick snapshot of some of the things that are going on at Pomfret. Most of this evening, however, was designed to be given over to you to ask questions, and for me, as best as possible, to try to provide answers. And if I can't provide answers, I certainly will figure out how I can get answers for you and get back to you. So with that, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Tim. And then just as a reminder to the group, the way we'll try to, I guess, manage the questions is like Amy has already put a question in the chat feature. So you can put a question in the chat feature or just put your name, and then that way I can just kind of call on the people who have a question. Then you can unmute yourself and ask Tim the question directly, or again, just put the question in the chat feature. So Tim, Amy's question is about the timeline for the capital projects. What's the budget and how will they be funded? And just wondering what further details you can share.
Sure. So the funding for all of them is coming out of the new bond issuance. So the money is already accounted for. The hard auditorium renovations will cost $6 million. And the plan is, we're running, imagine this, a construction project that is already behind the timeline. We're running a couple weeks late, but we hope to have a hard auditorium completed by February. The new roof, as I mentioned, on the school building is about $1.3 million. That should be completed this summer. The Jan rink should be completed. The total cost of the Jan rink, and I could go into more details because some of the funding is being supported by Woodstock Academy on this. That the total cost for that project is about $3.8 million. you'll notice that when all these figures are added up, it's more than $10 million. Some of that is what I mentioned about the Woodstock Academy, and some of it is that we had already established funding for largely for the hockey rink. The 3 new faculty residences will be in the neighborhood of $1 million, and they are, we're hopeful that those will be done around Thanksgiving. So I hope that answers your question, Amy.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Also, I see John Griswold has his hand up, and there is you can raise your hand if you want to. If you go to reactions, the reactions button down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little raise your hand icon, so you can ask questions that way. So John, you want to ask?
Yeah, I was wondering, Tim, can you give us a little overview of the enrollment picture, particularly as it relates to what the demographics are looking like, and the competition, of course, but how is the trend looking at the moment for enrollment?
Yeah, right now things look quite good for us. You know, something we've become, and maybe many of you are aware of, and maybe some of you others are not quite as aware of, there are very, very few schools now who still run on the March 10th acceptance, April 10th, the books are closed schedule, right? There may be 8 boarding schools who can say on April 10th now that they are completely full. I don't imagine that on Saturday, which I believe is April 10th, that we will have filled every one of our beds. I have a high degree of confidence in where our numbers are today, even relative to where they were last year. We're slightly ahead on this date than we were this time last year. And we ended up with a full school of 350 students this year. So I remain quite confident there. It is, however, a different year. I'm quite certain many of you have been reading about the challenges that colleges are facing in the college admission process, a function of all sorts of things, right? Something that we're not dealing with, that a lot of particularly selective colleges are dealing with, is the number of students last year who deferred their freshman year. 40% of Harvard's freshman class last year, for example, deferred for a full year. So what does that do for Harvard's admissions numbers? What colleges saw was also a massive, massive spike in applications that was due in a large part to a lot of schools, A, last year not having grades, and B, no colleges requiring standardized testing. So it's made the job of a college admission officer or director much more complicated. We're seeing something vaguely similar here. Our application numbers are near a record high, but we also know that more students are applying to more places than they have before, in part because no boarding schools are requiring standardized tests. So a lot of kids are taking flyers at sort of the big name schools that they never would have before if they'd had to submit an SSAT score. So that leaves us in sort of a similar position to some colleges, not really quite certain how the whole yield game is going to play out on April 10th. Again, the early returns, the pre-April 10th returns right now, John, look really quite good. But that, we haven't heard from about 100 students still, one way or another. And we will hear from them one way or another over the next 4 days. And then our admissions office, the way, again, 90+% of admission offices of independent schools and boarding schools, maybe in particular, will begin the process of bridging the delta between the number that they're looking for, both in net tuition revenue, but also in terms of filling beds over the next 4.5 months or so. If I haven't answered your question specifically enough, please just let me know.
Well, that's a good summary. Thanks, Tim.
And Tim, there's a related admissions question around the new structure you're putting in place with the exciting hiring of Susan and Peter, and just sort of your thinking behind that structure and how this will help Pomfret moving forward.
Yeah, so the model that I came up with isn't, I won't take credit for it. It's not actually original. It's a model that exists at quite a fair number of schools. It exists quite commonly at the higher ed level. And the idea is to not bifurcate responsibilities, but really have the Dean of Enrollment Management focused on the whole enrollment management picture from inquiry to accept to retention, and a focus on retention and outreach and strategic thinking about enrollment management. And that's Susan Goyen, Susan Mantilla Goyen. So she's the boss. She's running the whole operation. And then Peter Anderson will serve in this role, the Director of Admissions Operations. He'll kind of run the day-to-day internal stuff that really, I think Amy Graham would say, has not liberated her to do strategic level thinking about enrollment management, about what we need to do to be more thoughtful in attracting students, working more intentionally with marketing and communications, and then working more broadly across the entire school community on retention, working with the dean's office, working with the academic office, working with the collaborative learning, the director of the collaborative learning center, working with the new dean of diversity and inclusion. And so Peter's role will be to sort of organize the office, the day-to-day routines, travel, planning of events. And Susan will certainly be involved in these things, but she will be able to spend more of her time focused on the higher level strategic thinking needed to advance our efforts in the admission office.
Great. Tim, I received a message through the chat directly to me wondering about the reaction to the Atlantic magazine article, and just kind of curious for the reaction among different parts of the school community, and just sort of your reaction as well.
Sure. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 different people sent me a link to this article saying, hey, you might want to read this, or hey, I read this magazine article that you may find interesting. And I did find it interesting. And it is certainly, it has caused, it caused really a spike of buzz in our world. The theme that the author was getting at is one that is certainly one we're aware of. I think there were some number of people, and I want to respectfully say that while I admire the Atlantic and I even admire this writer, I found parts of the article a little tilted, a little one-sided. I thought it was unfortunate there was no student perspective, and I thought it was a little unfortunate that she cast all independent schools under the same umbrella, and which I think is unfair. Although Pomfret probably does fit more closely under the umbrella that she was describing, there are thousands of independent schools that don't bear any resemblance to the model that she was depicting, and I think they took a bum rap for that. The ideas around privilege are something that we are talking about all the time. It is something that certainly the senior admin team is diving into quite deeply this year. And we're very much looking forward to continuing the conversation with our new dean. So yes, I think there wasn't an independent school head or administrator who didn't read the article and say, yes, we hear you. Yes, you have, there's a point that you're making that we understand. We recognize that there's work to be done. I'll refrain from making any other sort of personal comments about the article. I think some people thought it was spot on, and I think some people thought that it was fit for nothing more than kindling.
Thank you, Tim. The next question is asking to kind of go into a little more detail on the Hard Auditorium project, and is that actually going to expand the footprint? Will it continue to be the theater and performance center? This has been a question that I guess the school's been wrestling with for some time.
Yeah, it has been, and to keep. So we're working with Mark Simon, class of 1964, and Centerbrook, his architectural firm, And then we're working with some theater designers along the way who have been fantastic consultants. And we had a firm fixed number, $6 million. That's not going up. We can't have budget creep in this process. So we very quickly identified one other reality in terms of what was fixed, and that was the square footage. We're not going to expand Hart Auditorium to make this work. What we're going to do is we're going to flatten the floor. We're going to put in telescoping seating that can retract and go out. It will be a much more flexible space. You'll be able to have different types of seating arrangements, and sort of the size and scope of the audience can look and feel quite different. There will be a balcony that will fit an additional about 100 people. We think we can fit more people. The estimates we're using are pretty conservative, but right now we think we can seat close to 450 people for a lecture or for a movie or a performance of some kind. And then we can create a much more intimate space where you could have almost a theater in the round type of situation if we wanted to. So it will be used much more. We will be improving acoustics, we'll be improving lighting, we'll be improving the draperies that don't really filter light and that are horrendously ugly color. So it'll be a much more aesthetically pleasing and a much more utilitarian space. It will lose some of, we're trying to figure out how we keep some of the beautiful wood trim and wainscoting around the place, even as we design something that will look and feel much more contemporary, much more modern.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Those are the questions that are currently in the chat. So I guess I just put it to the group here. Are there other, oh, I see Derry raising his hand. Derry, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead?
There. Thank you, Tim. And I have watched with great interest this year as you've done many things differently, often with a great deal of imagination. I'm curious how you see the school being different next year and in years to come because of what you've had to innovate during this time.
Well, I think it's a great question. And actually, there are some really easy things that we will carry forward out of here. Our facility with technology is one, right? Our ability to handle students who can't be, for student education to continue when they can't be on campus for either for health reasons or personal reasons is something pretty simple and pretty obvious that we carry forward. The way we think about seat time, right? The way we think about, how many minutes do you have to be spending in a seat in a class for it to be meaningful? Questioning some assumptions. And this is something that the pandemic didn't cause, but it's accelerated for us. Thinking about what the metrics of good learning should look like. When, last year, when in the spring, when grades were optional and we were pass fail, it liberated teachers to think about different ways of having students demonstrate their learning that wasn't focused on a number or a letter. And it led to, much greater creativity. That will become certainly a more central part of what we do in years to come, right? The emphasis on mental health and well-being has been a driver for us this year, doing everything we can during a time. Watch any news broadcast over the period of the year. How many times did Lester Holt have a series on mental health and well-being and adolescents in distress or rising rates of depression and anxiety amongst teens? So, here's one thing that we've taken out of this year. We are transforming our religion department into a well-being department. And there will be more details about what that means, but we're going to spend a lot more time making real our commitment to the simple. It's not even a theory. There's evidence. It's research-based decision making here that a happy, healthy adolescent is a higher performing adolescent. And so we're putting more emphasis on student well-being and adult well-being, for that matter, will I hope trail along. So how we think about assessments, how we think about student health is already shifting and will continue to shift. How we do assessments, how we can balance how we can leverage everything we've learned about learning virtually will continue to grow and not being confined to the teacher in a particular classroom and 12 students. But how do we leverage the people on this call, or the people in our alumni body, or our parents as experts through, and we all have a little Zoom fatigue, but this medium has allowed us to provide access to people and allowed our students to access alums and experts much more frequently and with much greater efficacy than we have ever done in the past. I think something that will continue, I hope, in earnest, will be the professional collaborations that have developed or that have increased as a function of the pandemic. I'll speak specifically, just very narrowly, to myself. About 7 years ago, I created something that was called the Head of School Consortium. And twice a year, I tried to invite 10 or 12 boarding school heads to come to Pomfret to spend a half a day talking about what was going on at our schools, right? We would have a topic of something we thought was important, and we'd discuss it. But that was it. I mean, that was all we did in terms of sharing best practices and what's working in our schools. That has exploded this year, right? And what I have learned from my peers, and what I hope perhaps at times they may have learned from me, has been extraordinarily helpful from systems to practices, from COVID to pedagogy and beyond, to how are you running a dining hall during a pandemic. So the more and more sharing across our industry has made us all better, and I anticipate that will continue. So that's a small nutshell. There will be other stuff that we carry forward, absolutely, but those are some key things I would say.
Thank you, Tim. The next question in the chat is around racial justice within the student body and also in the curriculum, and what the school additional steps have been toward promoting racial justice within the student body and also in the curriculum.
Well, I think I can say without any hesitation that the work that we've done as a community this year around DEIJ, if you want to add B for belonging in there, dwarfs anything that we've done in the school's history. I can't say that authoritatively in my time at the school. In terms of professional development, both the frequency and the quality of programming around addressing bias, addressing privilege, doing self-exploration. There are 2 seed seminars that are happening this year, one for all members of the senior administrative team, and then one for faculty and staff who express an interest in doing seed training. If you don't know about seed, it's a 27-hour program of profound self-analysis, self-examination that turns in, it impacts our thinking about process. The educational programs that we've had for students that have been led with uber competence by Jillian Forg and TC Hanmer has been fantastic. They have partnered with outside consultants who have done programming for adults and for kids. The Quest program's work around social justice issues has been more pronounced and more profound. So we've made several diversity hires for next year. I hope, as I said, to be able to add sort of an important one, another important one tomorrow. So and then, you know, we're waiting, I'm waiting for the report from the task force, which again will be another accelerator around social justice. We've given more student agency and more opportunities for students to have their voices heard, to share with us what they're feeling and what steps the school might take to make their lives at Pomfret better and give them a greater sense of belonging. We haven't been perfect, but we haven't been perfect in our history. But I can say with some degree of humility that I think the commitment that we've shown this year to the work around DEIJ or DEIBJ, or however you want, Jebi, has been genuine, it's been ongoing, and it's been more professional than it's ever been before.
Thank you, Tim. The next question is around the school's identity, I suppose. Sort of the question is saying, how do you see Pomfret having some unique identity in the future? I guess a couple of different ways to interpret that, but I'll let you take that one on, Tim.
How do we have a unique identity? I think being, and I guess you can't be truly unique or even very unique. Being unique is, you know, every school is unique in its own way. You know, I look at Pomfret and I say our community is uniquely good. I think our commitment to sort of a rapid prototyping mindset that is a mindset of continual renewal and experimentation sets us apart from most of the schools that I would consider our closest peers. Our commitment to student well-being, particularly with the focus that we're bringing to next year, I think differentiates us. I think, and it's not unique, but I think our ongoing focus and emphasis on mastery and eventually on the mastery and becoming a mastery transcript school, it won't make us unique, but it will make us distinctive because not many of our schools are pursuing it with the same, I think, urgency and thoughtfulness that we are. So I think we have an opportunity to remain, and what my goal is to continually strive to find the balance between being that progressive school that always wants to move forward and never lose sight of sort of the critical values and the critical elements of our past that make us who we are and who we have always been. And so our focus remains squarely on innovation. I mean, the strategic plan we have now is 8 years old, but it called on us to be bold and think differently, about innovative approaches to education. That will continue to make us different in some ways from most of our peers, but not all, because there are other good schools and good, you know, school people who are thinking along these same lines. But straddling that fine line between being innovative, being forward-thinking, being willing to fail, and not be willing to give up, sort of not being willing to lose our center. Our center has to hold. That is our core of who we are. That sits at the essence of the Pomfret experience. Can't change as we do that. That sounded like a little bit of a fluffy answer, but I think, you know, what will make us unique is if we can hold dearly to our traditions while also pushing the boundaries on developing, you know, the educational program that prepares our kids most thoughtfully to be compassionate, sensitive, inclusive leaders as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Next question is around our international students and how the pandemic is impacting their plans and ability to attend in person.
Yeah, and it's a mixed bag there. The great news when we came back in March was that we had an influx of international students who simply weren't able to make it in the fall. We have a bunch of our students from China, from Korea, who are on campus with us now, who weren't able to be on campus with us at all. In fact, we had students who arrived on March 19th or 20th who had never set foot on our campus before, right? Students who were freshmen who had been accepted, but had been accepted after a virtual interview last year. So we still have about 40 or 35 or 40 international students who are not on campus, for whom travel either hasn't been allowed for visa reasons, or whose families decided that the challenges of getting their students to campus and then home again were too great. And sadly, some of those are seniors who aren't with us. And happily, some of them are underclassmen, and it's our hope and belief that they'll be back here and in person in the fall. The program we've developed, our hybrid learning, our distance learning model has been continuously refined from where we were 12 months ago to today. It's night and day, two very different approaches, and we think the feedback we're getting from most of our kids is that the system that we're using now, which is a combination of both in-person, that is synchronous and asynchronous approaches to learning, is working much more effectively than it did last spring. So we're supporting them as best as we can. They're involved in more than just the academic program. They're involved in Quest, and they're involved in leadership programs. They're involved in clubs to the extent they can be, but we do miss having them here.
Tim, the next question goes to your comment about Pomfret moving toward being a mastery transcript school and wanting to learn more about that initiative.
So we'll need about an hour on that, just that topic. I'll try to give you about a 3-minute snapshot. A head of school at the Hawkins School named Scott Looney about 10 years ago became fed up with a traditional transcript. He found that it was a pretty poor vehicle for actually transmitting to colleges what a student actually was all about. That a set of grades and test scores were poor reflections of how students learned. It was not a good reflection of actual learning, and it didn't, a B in English didn't tell a college admission officer anything about how that student learned, except for they got a B. And so he set about rethinking what education should be fundamentally about. And he started the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which started out as a fairly small group of schools. Pomfret was one of the first 50 or so schools who signed on to pursue this concept. And you don't commit to anything, but you understand the value and what they're looking for. They're now, I think, in excess of 500 Mastery schools, and it includes, the big names are certainly looking at Andover and Exeter, both exploring Mastery as a driver. The long-term goal, and again, this is hard to explain without pictures and drawings, is to have a college transcript that doesn't have grades on it, but rather has demonstrations of a student's learning, how they learned, and not just what they learned, but how did they demonstrate particular competence? Was it through their verbal communication? Was it through their critical thinking and analysis? Was it through performance? So I'm happy to share more details as we move forward, but the idea is to keep it very simple, is to provide for colleges a snapshot of a student's experience that is a much more informative snapshot. That rather than saying this is a B student, this is a student whose critical thinking in STEM is through the roof. And here's how it was demonstrated, right? Through these particular exercises that demonstrated this not competence, but excellence. It really takes the pressure off of the grade grub that all of our students still feel, and it focuses on earnest and authentic demonstration of learning. I think it's picking up steam. Last year was the first year that students at several schools applied to colleges with a fully mastery-based transcript. And they did extremely well, so. It's hard to
Tim-
explain without having sort of a visual in front of you. Another time, maybe I could do that.
And Tim, the next question is related to that, sort of the question of, as we move towards that model, how might this impact how we think about our own admissions, and how admissions might approach the task of moving beyond standardized testing and trying to make our own judgments about incoming students.
So here's a little fun fact for you. If you hadn't already heard, we don't require standardized testing anymore. We decided that pre-pandemic that Pomfret was no longer going to require SSATs for our students applying. The only test that we require is for students for whom English is not a first language. So we require a TOEFL test of English as a foreign language, because we still believe that a certain level of fluency with English is required to really be able to survive and thrive at Pomfret. So we already are moving in this direction as an admission office by saying early what all schools ended up saying for this year, that they weren't going to require standardized tests. I think it's going to be, and just to focus on standardized tests, I think putting that toothpaste back in the tube is going to be really hard for schools and colleges. I'm not saying it won't happen. I think it probably will, but I think this was somewhat of one more nail in the standardized test coffin, which for me is a glorious thing. I thought I was a pretty good student as a high schooler, but I was a terrible standardized test taker, and I thought they were pretty poor reflections of my abilities. But you know, that's a 40-year-old hangover I'm still dealing with. The reality is that Pomfret is already de-emphasizing that, focusing more of our attention on somewhat on the coursework, an awful lot on recommendations and the interview. These things really are significant in our assessment of students. And as we become more of a mastery-based school, the way we approach the students we think would fit well in this model will evolve as well to be focused more on skills than on grades. So, you know, you've all heard about the classical skills kids need: critical thinking, communication, collaboration. All of these things can be metriced at some level or another. So we'll be focusing on developing new metrics to help us assess student capacity and potential.
These have been some wonderful questions. Again, we've worked through the questions that are currently in the chat. So I would just put it to the group with the 5 minutes we have remaining. Are there other questions you'd like to put to Tim, either in the chat or by raising your hand?
I see
I
Andrew.
see someone raising their hand.
Andrew is literally raising his hand. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, so I'm sure, as you mentioned earlier, you really take the temperature of the students, not obviously both literally as well as figuratively.
Yes, we do.
With regard to their input, can you just top line what, you know, maybe the top 3 things that they like about the school from a student perspective, and also perhaps the areas that they really think the school is lacking or needs help in, the 3 things that they would like to see changed?
Yeah, and there are others on the phone I would encourage to jump in there as well. There are a bunch of faculty and staff who could jump in. I think kids love the Pomfret community. I think it sounds almost trite because we talk about it so much, but there's a reason we talk about it so much, because kids feel it pretty earnestly. I think I wouldn't say that if you polled 350 kids that they'd all have the same top 3 answers. But I'd say connections with faculty would be really high. The palpable sense of community would be really high. The quality of our programs would be pretty high. Both specific academic programs, we have for students who want to shine. Our certificates program is for a small percentage of our kids, something that they really, really like. It really gives them an opportunity to dive deeply into something they're passionate about. I think they love, when it happens, Project Pomfret, which we're going to actually offer at the end of the year, at the conclusion of this year, rather than during the year. Things they don't like. Well, it's an adolescent prerogative to complain about food, and they do. And you can't blame them. During the pandemic, Flick is our dining service partner. They've been remarkable. They've been terrific. They've been flexible. But kids are going in at dinner and they're getting their food out of a cardboard container and carrying it back to their seat where there are plexiglass dividers. So that it's really hard to have a conversation. If you really want to ask kids what they like about Pomfret School right now, it'll be a little more challenging than in normal times. And for kids to find things they don't like about Pomfret School right now, ask them about COVID precautions. Ask them about COVID restrictions. Ask them about not having the whole school together for a dance, or in the dining hall, or in the chapel, or being able to have more than one friend in your room at a time. Imagine that from your days at the school. That's a really hard thing to consider. So the pandemic has certainly put a damper on sort of some of the core elements of who we are. But I think those relationships, the relationship building is probably still sort of at the very core of what they love most. The advisor program remains, I think, the best advisor program I've ever heard of or seen anywhere. And I think kids would say that. I think Senior Chapel Talks, as is evidenced by what I said earlier, remains incredibly high on everyone's list. Even if you're new to the school, it's hard to miss how powerful all that is. So those are a few things I think they'd say. But Louisa or Will, Vassar, Judith, Tammy, would anyone add anything?
I'll just add that I think that the idea that this is going to end and there's great optimism and forward thinking, and we're going to have games this weekend. We haven't had games in
13.
over a year for varsity teams. Fingers crossed everybody passes their COVID testing beforehand. But I think that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and all those things are happening that Tim just talked about are happening all over the world at every kid in every school. We're lucky that our kids are on campus. The advisee group, I have 5 new advisees because I graduated last year. 4 are freshmen. They were here all fall. None of them, switched to distance learning. They love being here. Our advisee group really enjoys each other's company. It's nothing to do with me, believe me. I can't get them to be quiet during advisee meeting when they're supposed to be listening to Tim tell us what's up, like today. They were just talking about stuff. So I think the what's out there on the horizon is really positive for them, and they're excited for that.
They are, and they see the light coming at the end of the tunnel. Some number of them, our vice president was off campus today getting his first COVID shot. All Pomfret employees have now received their 2nd dose of the Moderna vaccine. We did that as a community. So the light is definitely coming. I think I saw a question about commencement. We will have commencement on Sunday, May 23rd. Happy birthday, Ann Richards. We will combine the day, and it will include sort of an award ceremony and graduation, likely under a tent somewhere on campus. A restricted number of family members. We won't be able to have a big awards dinner the night before. We won't be able to have a big luncheon afterwards. We will provide food. But we're still planning a senior trip, senior rafting trip, the weekend of graduation. We're still hopefully going to have the senior faculty softball game or some facsimile thereof. We're going to hopefully have some kind of prom. Not sure what that's going to look like. Dance-free prom, I don't know. So we're trying to find ways for kids to enjoy their spring, and particularly our seniors who have lost so much both last year and this year. But yeah, Sunday, May 23rd, likely starting at 1 p.m. It's a go. We have a great graduation speaker. William Tong, the Attorney General for the state of Connecticut, will be our graduation speaker, and he will be here in person, which is great. So excited about that.
Great. Well, that's a good question to end on. It's now a little just past 8:30, and so I guess we better wrap it up. And thank you for your time this evening, Tim, and thank you everyone else for your time this evening.
Really appreciate everyone joining, and stay well, stay healthy, and please stay connected to all of us here at Pomfret. Anyone have any questions other than those that have come up? My email address is readily available, and I'm happy to take your questions at any time.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Good night.
All. Nice seeing you.
Everyone.
Fun seeing the younger gen there. Jeremy, Christy. Thanks for coming.